Welcome back. It was on this day back in 1865 when Texas slaves learned of their freedom, more than 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
The executive order ending slavery also has an interesting tie-in to the formation of our state. Team 12's Jonathan McCall takes us on a history lesson.
When President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863, the executive order made persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state be forever free. At the time, Arizona wasn't a state. In fact, it was split into two territories, New Mexico to the north, Arizona to the south. And while the proclamation didn't apply at the time, slavery in Arizona would change 1 month later.
So the Arizona Organic Act, it sounds like it pertains to fruits and veggies, but it was actually an act of Congress in 1862 that organized Arizona at its present boundaries.
The Arizona Organic Act was proposed in Congress in 1862 to keep Arizona from becoming a slave state. President Lincoln made the signing official 1 month after, in February of 1863. Not only did the act form Arizona at its current boundaries, it also banned slavery in the new Arizona Territory.
And so this turnabout, this change actually had profound ramifications for what would happen later on, which was that Arizona would be a state that would not tolerate slavery.
Calvin Schimmerhorn is a history professor at Arizona State.
Is that something that do you feel that a lot of folks aren't aware of, that at one point that this state really kind of was on two different sides of this conversation when it comes to slavery and its history?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that we don't think about when we think about the Old West is the possibility of African-American slavery in Arizona.
Among the language in the Arizona Organic Act, slavery nor involuntary servitude would be permitted in Arizona. Those words would be key just months later.
And the Organic Act reads very much like the 13th Amendment, so this kind of foreshadowed the 13th Amendment.
That's when the 13th Amendment would take effect, abolishing slavery in America.
The question of whether there were African Americans in Arizona Territory is an interesting one because African Americans aren't counted in the census. We do have reports that Confederate forces coming from Texas brought enslaved African Americans with them. And so those people might be the sole enslaved people in the territory of Arizona.
But after the Organic Act and 13th Amendment were in place, there would be new challenges.
But they said in ratifying the 13th Amendment, Congress has no right to enfranchise African Americans.
A newly formed territorial legislature created and passed laws that Schimmerhorn says targeted blacks.
Right? The territorial legislature passed an act that segregated schools, I believe in 1907. And it took until the early 1950s when civil rights activists here in Phoenix challenged that in court and got that overturned,
sparking conversations of civil rights in the growing territory and across America.
But there's a big kind of legal distance between no slavery and affirmative civil rights, which is why we needed the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the Civil Rights Act of 1875 and all these enforcement mechanisms that counteracted this determined resistance to extend civil rights to African Americans.
It's a fight that continued well through Arizona's statehood in 1912, the Jim Crow era, and the 1965 Civil Rights Act, and still to this day. Jonathan McCall, 12 News.